Hi, everybody. Welcome to my fairly quick, I hope, explanation of what to do with your poster and kind of some answers to some frequently asked questions about how to put together this poster, what Tucker and I are looking for, and how to just kind of create the best impact with your poster. So you've signed up for poster topics. You have a vague idea of what you want to do with this. Maybe you're discussing in your group some ideas. There are two possibilities for layout, design, and focus as you think about this, and you'll see this in the assignment. One of them is a more artistic photo collage kind of thing. And we say photo, but if you want to do hand drawings in there or whatever you decide to do, a more artistic take on your message or your research. The other one is kind of more of a traditional academic poster. And I'll just tell you a little bit about ways to approach each of them. With the more artistic photo collage type poster, it might be easy to think, oh, okay, well, that'll be the easy one because all I have to do is find a bunch of pictures and I'll just throw them on a piece of paper and we'll call it a day. That is not the most effective photo collage type of poster. So a really great way to think about this with your group is discuss what you want your message or your idea to be, your focus, and then select images or go out and take pictures that reflect that. Then you want to think about layout. How are we putting this together on the page? How is the viewer going to look at it? What's going to draw their eye first? Where's their eye going to go next? And how does this tell a story? We can show you a couple of examples of groups that have done this really well. If you have anyone among your group or any resources in your arsenal who are really artistic, friends in the art school, people who do graphic design, people who have studied art history, that's great. That can be really helpful in putting together a more artistic take on a poster. Because you still have a message, maybe it's a particular point you're trying to showcase, maybe it's a particular focus, but it doesn't really hammer a particular message home, but it's a focus at least. You're going to want to think about how the viewer's eye is drawn in and what they're feeling as they're looking at it. So it is a little bit more of an artistic way of looking at things. And if you all are a little outside of your comfort zone with that, that's okay. It's still a really fun exercise to try and figure out how to lay this out and tell this story. And I have seen groups who are really great at it and have really succeeded well. I've also seen some groups who've kind of fallen flat, and usually it was because at the last minute, they did some sort of Google image search, found a bunch of pictures, tossed them in a poster, and called it a day. So that sort of lack of thought behind what they were doing really showed in the poster. But, it can be very visually impactful and can really say a lot, even just being images. So as you're putting together your more artistic poster, that's something to keep in mind. With the more research-focused posters, the more you might think traditional. Traditional doesn't have to mean boring at all. So one thing I would suggest to you, and this is kind of good in life anyway, and many things you're doing, the more visual you can make it, the better. Nobody really wants to walk up to a poster that's all text and just stand there and read it. Things like graphs, tables, bulleted lists, the things you talk about and learn about in tech writing, those are great for making the poster a little more visually impactful. Photographs, you can incorporate a lot of that in there. And also with a more traditional type of poster that weaves together text and image, still think about the layout. Where do you want to put stuff? How do you want this to look? What kind of a story is it telling? So with these topics, you might think, okay, they're like big. Some of these are big topics. How do I narrow it down? And you're going to have to narrow it down because something like healthcare inequity and access, that's huge. Even if you just look at healthcare access in the United States, that's a gigantic topic. And it is really difficult to be able to narrow that down. You might think about a particular topic within, okay, so since I used the example of healthcare access or healthcare inequality, you might say, one of our group members recently read about maternal death rates in hospitals. Basically, when mothers are having babies or right afterwards, there's a huge discrepancy by race of in the United States of outcomes. More babies are dying, and more mothers are dying who are African American versus white, and that is true across income lines. So it kind of opens up a big question of why. And if that's something that's interesting to you and your group, that would be a neat focus. And maybe you would not specifically be looking at St. Louis, or maybe you would, but you've narrowed down a focus. You might say, okay, we're going to look a little bit more at lack of insurance and access to decent doctors nearby. And maybe the way to narrow that down then is to think about it in a part of St. Louis, or to compare two parts of St. Louis. It doesn't have to be St. Louis. This class is a St. Louis focused class, so it makes sense. It's something that you all have in common. You all have St. Louis in common because you live here. But let's say whatever you're studying doesn't really have a lot of data or information in St. Louis, but there's another city in the United States that has done something cool or is really like on the leading edge of something. That might be an interesting thing to look at. So there's no rule that it has to be St. Louis focused. It's just that most of you will choose that as a focus because it makes sense. It's a good way of regionally narrowing it down. So that's a little bit about how to narrow it down. Some of your topics are already a bit narrowed down for you, like the Del Mar Divide. You already have a street to look at. You already have a city to look at. Del Mar is not a long street by any means. When you're looking at the Del Mar Divide, it continues on sort of where Del Mar would be, like maybe Olive going out to West County and North County. But really, when you're looking at a lot of the Del Mar Divide, you're looking in St. Louis City and University City. And so that kind of narrows it down for you. But then it's hard to narrow it down also by topic. You might be taking a look at some parallels that you're seeing between a lot of different topics. Racial disparity, income disparity. There are a lot of different disparities as you look at the Del Mar Divide. And because you're focused so narrowly on a region, you could have a lot of different topics because you already have a sort of a narrow focus. So as you're trying to narrow down, if you're having trouble with it or anything like that, let me or Tucker know, let your TAs know. We're all happy to help you narrow down your topic to something that's manageable. One additional thing we're asking you to do this semester is to include at least one primary source, and I'll say that with a caveat, to try to include at least one primary source to get in touch with a community member who's affected by this or who has a particular opinion from the inside on it, and to interview them or talk to them in some way. You might say, so here's the caveat, you might say, we've tried. We got in touch with this person, we emailed them a couple times, we left a phone message for them, and we haven't heard back. That is sometimes how work with community members goes. It can be frustrating. They have their own lives and a lot is going on, and it might just be a lower priority or something that slips off their plate to return a phone message or to return an email. So do your best to get in touch with someone. And we are working on finding a list of community members based on one of our contacts who's going to be a presenter for you for this spring break. He is working on pulling together some people who have already identified that they would be interested in talking about their experience and having you get in touch with them. So that kind of takes a little bit of the legwork away. But if you know somebody, if you are interested in talking to someone, those of you who are from St. Louis, you may know people, or if any of you volunteers in, let's say, underserved school districts, and you've talked to parents of kids and you think that this set of parents that you have talked to before would be really happy to share their experience with you, that's great. It doesn't have to be somebody from a pre-approved list from me and Tucker. You can certainly pick somebody that you know outside of that. But do at least reach out to a primary source, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but you tried at least. So that is part of this assignment as well. when you put this together, so okay, I've talked about finding a primary source. As far as your other sources go, really be thoughtful about where you get your information. This is just a good life skill. Be thoughtful about where you get your information. Where is this stuff coming from? Whose opinion is it, if it is an opinion? If it's a primary source, let's say it's a video that you're looking at, does it seem like it's coming from a legitimate news organization? If it's sort of coming from just the random internet, how do you know that it hasn't been changed? So you may want to vet your sources in some way. And if you're having trouble figuring out how to choose things, how to figure out what's reliable and what's not, or even just how to find things in a large field that you're looking at, our engineering subject librarian, Lauren Todd, is a really wonderful resource, and you should reach out to her. I believe her contact info is on our Canvas page, but if it's not, I'll make sure and include it there. WashU has access to a lot of resources that you might not know about. Journal articles and news articles from archives from a long time ago, if you're looking for primary sources from a particular time period. There's all kinds of cool stuff that WashU has access to, and it might not be immediately apparent when you go to the library website, because the library website is notoriously awful. So, so having Lauren help you navigate this process would be really great. Also, because many of your topics fall into social science fields, she may be able to get you in touch with the subject librarian in that field, who could then help you delve in even further. So, we do request that you cite your sources. This should be obvious. This is college. Cite your sources. Use MLA, APA, Chicago style, whatever style you're familiar with and comfortable with, you can use. It has to be a real citation style. And you can print that source list separately if you want to and tape it to the back of your poster. If you don't want it actually on the poster, you can... for those of you doing the more research type posters, if you want, when you put your sources on there, they could be on the front, but in the bottom right and really small in comparison to the text that you used on the rest of the poster, and that's perfectly fine. It does need to be clear which information came from which source. So however you decide to do those in-text citations, we need to know, oh, this statistic came from this source. We shouldn't have to guess out of your 10 sources which one said that 70% of the population does blah, 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 whatever that is. So, so do make sure and be careful about citing your sources. As far as images go, cite your images as well. You may not want to put the citation right on the image, especially those of you doing the photo collages, because you might say, well, we really want this to be visually impactful. We don't want a bunch of citations right under the images right in this poster. You can put that citation list on the back. Just make it clear which picture came from where. So maybe you say these citations go from top left, left to right, top to bottom. And then we know which image came from which place. If you took the pictures yourselves, then you don't have to cite them. You can just kind of let us know. We took these pictures ourselves. And that is really cool if you can take the pictures yourselves, or some of them. But if you're getting them from a photographer, from a website or whatever, we just need to know where they come from. So that's a little bit about citing your sources. When you print these posters, you have to get them printed from, well, you can get them printed wherever you want to. My suggestion is to get them printed from Engineering IT, which is on the 4th floor of La Plata. It's not terribly expensive to print those posters. It's about $15, give or take. And so if you split that among 5 people, it should be fine. If there are any concerns individually, if any of you is like, this is cost prohibitive for me, I really can't spend this money, talk to me or Tucker, we'll figure it out. So print those posters, print them the week before spring break, because that Friday before spring break is the last day that Engineering IT is open. And then you can store them in my office, which is completely fine, and we'll make sure that they get over to Ferguson Brewing Company on the Friday of spring break, where you're going to present them. You don't have to do a speech or anything as far as the presentation goes. It's a more casual thing. They'll be up on easels. A few of you will stand with your poster. The others can go look at the other posters. And just be on hand to answer questions, to talk a little bit about how you came up with your idea and what your focus was, and to kind of just talk to people who want to learn more about what you found. We're going to have, it's mostly you guys, so it's mostly students who are the audience for this poster, but also there's going to be some community members. We invite everybody who is a guest speaker to that poster day at Ferguson Brewing Company. And then we also have at least two, but I think only two people who are going to be speaking on a panel that day. And so they also will be there taking a look at your posters. So it's kind of a mixed audience. We invite some WashU people as well. We always invite the dean. Don't worry, he never is able to make it. It is spring break after all. But yeah, we invite just some WashU people to come check it out. Every once in a while, we have a professor take us up on it and come by. Last year, somebody from the Gephardt Institute came by and took a look at it, and her husband, who's an engineering professor, was also there. So yeah, we just kind of have a good mix of people taking a look at your posters, but it's very casual, and there's food, and so it's not super high pressure. So that is just kind of a little bit about how the posters will be viewed. You are going to turn in a rough draft of it on Canvas, and we'll print that for you on 11 by 17 when we sit down with you and take a look at the rough draft of it and give you feedback. Do spend some time making that rough draft less rough and more what you want it to look like in the end, because then we can give you really valuable feedback on it. So just kind of be thoughtful about it. The rough draft that you show us, don't have it be so rough that that we're looking at it and we're kind of like, oh, here's what you plan to do, but you haven't done it yet. So it really is kind of a good idea to have a good solid draft to show us. That said, though, if you're struggling, if you're like, we're just struggling to even find a focus, we don't know what to do, we could use that rough draft meeting to actually help you narrow down and kind of figure out what to do. If your group is having some conflict about it, if you can't figure out a focus, my suggestion is actually to let us know earlier than the rough draft meeting. That way we can talk to you beforehand, and then you can still have a rough draft review. So get started as soon as you can. It would be nice to get started reasonably soon. We don't have a ton of time before spring break. We have even less time before the rough draft of this poster is due. So just kind of keep that in mind. I know it's easy to push things off that don't seem to be due anytime too soon, but I would say get cracking. So thanks, and let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you soon.